Hey, what's going on, AP people? We have a video for you today on new immigration, which is immigration that occurs after the Civil War. Hopefully you've watched the video I did on old immigration. If not, there is a link in the description for you to watch. And also, if you want to download the PowerPoint that is used in this video, please follow the link in the description to head on over to apushreview.com where you can download this PowerPoint and every other one that I have for all my videos. All right, let's get going. So what exactly is new immigration? Well, these are immigrants that came from Southern and Eastern Europe. Now, old immigrants came from Northern and Western Europe. So new immigration is going to come from a different part of Europe, and again, Southern and Eastern Europe. You definitely have to know that they came from Southern and Eastern Europe, and many of them came through New York City and Ellis Island. Here's a picture from the early 1900s of immigrants coming through from Ellis Island, and often one of the first things they saw was the Statue of Liberty when they would come over here. So what are the specific countries that are involved with new immigrants? We know it's Southern and Eastern Europe, but we need to know that it is Poland, Italy, Greece, Hungary, etc. So those countries on the eastern portion of Europe. When did it occur? It mainly occurred between the 1880s and 1920. We'll see that something happens in the 1920s that limits immigration. All right, why did they come here? Where did they settle? Why they came here? Well, one of the reasons was for economic opportunity. See, some of these immigrants came for a very short time to make money. Then they would go back home and send that money back home, and then they would go back home and be with their families. Those are called birds of passage. There also was a lack of military conscription or a draft here, and many countries in Europe at the time had a draft for their citizens. And you see certain groups of people, including Jews, that come here due to religious persecution. So again, it's really the same reasons why people have come to the United States throughout history. It's economic and religious opportunities. And where did they settle? Overwhelmingly, these groups settled in urban areas. We saw with old immigration, the Germans tended to settle on the frontier, and the Irish tended to settle on the East Coast. And we'll see that the new immigrants will settle a lot of times on the East Coast, but overwhelmingly in urban areas. You'll see it in large cities like New York City and Chicago. And they'll live in apartments called dumbbell tenements. And here's a picture of a dumbbell tenement. They're very, very crowded, very unsanitary. And you absolutely positively must know this guy. This is Jacob Riis, who was a photojournalist. He was actually buddies with Teddy Roosevelt when he was the police commissioner of New York City. And he would use photographs to document how these poor urban immigrants lived. And Jacob Riis and How the Other Half Lives appears quite often on the APUSH exam, so definitely be familiar with him. If you've ever seen the show Cheers, he looks a lot like Cliff Clavin. You should look him up. All right, so what were some challenges faced by new immigrants? Many had a hard time assimilating or adjusting to American life. And remember that term assimilating, we've seen it with Native Americans with the Dawes Act. This is the idea of trying to make people become American. And one of the reasons why they had a hard time assimilating was that they spoke different languages. And many of these immigrants were highly illiterate as well. And they would often live in ghettos. New immigrants often worked in unskilled jobs, and they would often work for lower wages, and that would really upset American-born workers. Here is a political cartoon from Puck magazine, and you see here that this business owner is hiring all of these immigrants coming off this boat over here, but this American guy with his family is out of a job because the immigrants are taking his job. So that was a common theme with old immigrants as well. And think back to Nina, No Irish Need Apply, and different ways to discriminate against immigrants. The same thing is going on here with new immigrants. They were also hard to unionize because there was that language barrier. And we're going to see political bosses often gave immigrants jobs and resources. This is the famous Tammany Hall in New York City. This is where you'll see some corruption going on in Tammany Hall. And immigrants became a very strong voting presence, and they tended to vote Democrat in these big cities. Okay, let's talk about the reaction to the new immigrants. Very important person to know. We have Jane Addams from Chicago. She was the founder of this place, the Hull House, which was a settlement house, which helped provide housing, food, and education for poor women and immigrants. This was a way to help immigrants adjust to American life. And this helped spur other settlement houses, but the most famous settlement house is the Hull House with Jane Addams in Chicago. You absolutely positively need to know her. Nativism we talked about in the old immigrant video. Again, that's the fear, distrust, and hatred of foreigners. And some causes of nativism, it's always going to be taking jobs. we'll see a lot of these new immigrants are Catholic, coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, and there will be this fear of the Pope. And they'll also, some of these groups will have different government ideas. There'll be a lot of socialism and even some anarchism, which will frighten some Americans. And we'll see this group develop, the American Protective Association, also known as the APA, and they urged votings against Catholics, and they favored tougher immigration laws. This is a lot like the Know Nothing Party from the 1840s and 50s. Okay, let's talk about the immigration laws of the 1920s. But before we do, we have to look at the past censuses, censi. So if we look at 1881 to 1890, we'll see that overwhelmingly most immigrants are from Northern and Western Europe. But as the time goes on, we're going to see more and more Southern and Eastern or new immigrants coming over. But something happens in the 20s that reverses that. We'll figure it out. So in 1921, we have the Emergency Quota Act of 1921, and this restricted the number of immigrants from a country to 3% of the total people from that country living in the U.S. in 1910. So I'm going to make it simple because I'm not a math teacher. Let's say in 1910 there are 100 Italians living in the United States. That means, according to the Emergency Quota Act of 1921, only 3 Italian immigrants can come over to the United States. So this is a way to severely restrict immigration. It's important to know the year 1910, and this is going to favor Southern and Eastern Europe because there's a lot of immigrants here. You can see that basically 3/4 of the immigrants in 1910 were from Southern and Eastern Europe. Definitely hurts the amount of immigrants coming in, but still pretty favorable to Southern and Eastern Europe. So 3 years later, Congress passes another act, the National Origins Act of 1924. And this cuts the quota from 3% down to 2%, so even less are coming in. But instead of the 1910 census, Congress is going to use the 1890 census, and that's going to hurt new immigrants. Let's take a look at this again. In 1890, you'll see that the new immigrants is very small here. It's probably about, what does that look like? 1/6, 1/5. So it's really going to hurt these new immigrants, and that will favor the old immigrants. So you really, this number here, you can only have 2% of a specific country coming in. And these two acts signified an end to previously unrestricted immigration. You'll see that for the most part, there was no restrictions on immigration from Europe. We did have the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, but that's a little different. That's not a part of the new immigration. All right, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully that helped clarify what new immigration is and is not. Please take a moment and subscribe to my channel if you have not already. Help me spread the word. If you could show this to your friends, throw this on Twitter or Facebook, I would greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day, guys.